All right, so welcome back to the next episode of my NHL Deep Dive series. This is team number 21, and today we're talking about the Buffalo Sabres. And Buffalo's been a team that I've been pretty high on the last like 2 years, and I had making the playoffs last year. And these aren't my obviously this isn't my predictions. In order, this is kind of just currently how I'd rank these rosters. Of course, the grades are not predictive; they're based on what players have done so far in the NHL. Um, so I don't know if I'd have Buffalo higher than 21 at the end of this because I've kind of believed in them a lot over the last couple of years, and I don't know if I'm willing to do that again. It's kind of like I don't know. They're just that team that every year seems to always have a great offseason, and then once the season kicks around, then all of a sudden none of that really mattered, and they seem to falter out. But jumping into their offseason moves, first of all, let's talk about those because it was a busy offseason in terms of the offense for this team. They bring in Sam Lafferty, they bring in Jason Zucker, they bring in Nicholas Aube-Kubel, and they bring in Ryan McLeod. They move out or move on from Gergensons, Victor Olofsson, Tyson Jost, um, Jeff Skinner, which is the big one, Eric Robinson, and Matthew Savoie. And I have this group as slightly downgraded. And I look at it like this. I look at Tyson Jost and Eric Robinson as just kind of like throw in pieces, like basically not great, like kind of fringe NHL players. Um, so I look at it like this. If you were to trade Sam Lafferty, Jason Zucker, Nicholas Aube-Kubel, and Ryan McLeod for Gergensons, Olofsson, Skinner, and Savoie, would your team be better or worse? And I think I take Skinner over Zucker. I'd probably go Lafferty over Gergensons. And then you're looking at Savon Olofsson for Aube-Kubel and McLeod, and I think you're slightly leaning towards um Savoie and Olofsson in that group. Um, so that's kind of how I broke that down. Do I think they like massively downgraded? No. Do I think it's that big of a thing? It kind of depends on if Matthew Savoie can figure it out in Edmonton, and especially now, I think he's going to get an opportunity to do that based on the pretty massive hole that just appeared in their top nine. So yeah, I think it's an interesting group. Defensively, I have them at slightly it's supposed to be I don't know why it's not white, but it was white before. It's supposed to be a neutral. They get Dennis Gilbert, who's just kind of a guy. They don't lose anybody. It's supposed to be neutral. I don't know why it's not white. I apologize. And then in net, finally we have the team that added James Reimer. I've been preaching James Reimer to a bunch of teams throughout this whole thing. He ends up going to Buffalo, which is like one of the teams that I didn't think he'd fit well in because they already have two goalies, but he's here and the group is upgraded. I have to say it's slightly upgraded because they lose Eric Comrie, they add James Reimer. Um, yeah, it's a good signing. I like James Reimer as a depth move. This is kind of the if, Levi or Uka end up faltering out, they have somebody behind them. So there you go. I like the move overall for Buffalo, but I don't think it's like a game changing move. That's why it's just slightly upgraded because I mean you just added a backup. So there you go. That's the offseason moves. Overall, the forward group is enough of a wash that I'm not like super concerned about it. Defensively, they didn't really do much. And in net, they got security. So it wasn't like it was busy in the sense that they made a lot of moves, but it wasn't busy in the sense that they went out and like added a bunch of game changing players, right? Like I didn't really lose any either, right? Jeff Skinner was probably the best player they lost, and that's about it. And I think that's a good place to transition into this offense because it's an offense that currently ranks 21st in my rankings and is led by Paige Thompson, Alex Tuck, and Dylan Cousins. These are their kind of three pillars as of now, and then everything else around it is just guys who could really pop off, right? Like that's been the story of Buffalo for the last number of years is if their young guys, their young forwards can figure it out, this offense is going to be really good. And Tage Thompson had a down year last year. Um, and I don't expect that to continue. His offense was very dynamic the last couple years before that. And even last year, his underlying numbers kind of pointed to it being more of a slump than his gameplay completely changing. So I don't have a ton of concerns about Tage Thompson yet. But we'll see if he starts off slow again this year, then it might be more of a concerning trend than just a year of having bad puck luck. Alex Tuch's kind of the other one. There's been some rumors about Buffalo trying to move on from Alex Tuch, which I don't necessarily think is a bad idea. I don't think it's necessary. At this point, Alex Tuch is still an extremely useful player, and he's a big part of this kind of like leadership core. But I think obviously you need to eventually make room in the top six. He kind of feels like the guy in this top six that is going to go. Um, and then you have Dylan Cousins, who had a very solid season last year, and has looked like a number two center behind Thompson, and should fill into that role nicely. And I think he'll take an even bigger step this year. I think, especially if you give him Quinn and Benson, who is what Daily Faceoff had at the time of me making the graphic, uh, you're looking at a very formidable top six if everybody kind of steps up, right? I mean, like JJ Paterka had a very good underrated season last year. He's somebody that I look to take another, maybe not major step, but another, decent enough step as kind of that third guy on that line. Tage Thompson had a bad year last year, and then Alex Tuch is going to be pretty consistent. He's going to be consistently Alex Tuch. But it's that second line for me here in Buffalo that really is what gets me excited about this team. And it's Benson, Cousins, and Quinn as of Daily Faceoff's rankings. I keep saying that because I always get comments, oh, the lines are wrong. They're based off what Daily Faceoff has. Don't get mad at me. That's what they have. That's what I'm going with. Okay. Sorry. Um, Within reason, obviously, if there's players I think should be in the forward core, then I'll add them over somebody else. But like for the most part, it's just what Daily Faceoff has. But those three players, more specifically, are three guys who I think could all take pretty big steps this season. Obviously, Zach Benson had a very solid rookie season when he played. It started off a little shaky, but as the season went on, he definitely found his game. And for a player like him, I expected it to be kind of a slower rookie season. And I think giving him more opportunity, especially now that Skinner's gone, will be helpful. And I think that's kind of why they were able to move off of Skinner. Whereas, like, instantly with the roster, like, it looks like a bit of a downgrade because Jeff Skinner was the best player that they either added or got rid of this summer. But you're hoping that Zach Benson can kind of move into that scoring role in that top six. Obviously Dylan Cousins is Dylan Cousins. He's very good. And then Jack Quinn, who's had moments of looking like a legitimate top six forward, and he's had moments where he hasn't. And I think for Jack Quinn, I just need to see more consistency through an 82 game season. And if he can do that, then as the sixth guy in this forward core, that's a very strong six. Um, and then even below that, I mean, like this team has, and this is why, as much as I think the Matthew Savoie move was an overpayment for Ryan McLeod, who's really just a third line center, and not much else, they really already have their kind of six forwards. Like Savoie was expendable in a way, right? So they moved him to fill a specific team need. So I get the trade in that aspect, even though I think they overpaid. Um, but they used a surplus asset to go get something that they needed. And I think that's the point of drafting the best player available all the time, is that yeah, you might lose the trade in terms of like the pick, but you can use those assets to then go kind of fill needs wherever you want because teams will take those guys for basically whatever you want to get back. So this is kind of the example of like, yeah, the trade on paper doesn't look great for Buffalo, but they're able to use a surplus of assets to go fill a need. So that's kind of the logic behind that move. But Ryan McLeod's fine as a third line center. I mean, we saw what he did in the playoffs in Edmonton last year. And I like he's not going to be a game changer, but it's a good depth piece. And I actually think that a line with him, Zucker, and Greenway makes a lot of sense if that's the way they want to go. Um, you kind of have a line that a lot of teams aren't going to want to play against, and a line that is very good at suppressing offense You might not get a ton of like offensive upside from that line, typically compared to some of the third lines like that we're going to talk about later. But certainly, it's going to be a formidable third line to play against, and that's kind of what Buffalo needed. They needed to kind of secure the bottom six, and they did that this summer. So that's good for them. Peyton Krebs on the fourth line is another player who I'm super interested in, taking a big step forward this summer or this season. And then you have, Lafferty and Abe Kubel, and Nicholas Abe Kubel isn't the player that he was a couple of years ago, but he's still a useful bottom six forward. He's not the like super dynamic like blue bar king that he was 2 years ago, but 2 or 3 years ago, but he is still a super useful player. Um, and I think he'll fit nicely. Same with Sam Lafferty, another guy that just kind of has really fell into that role of like being a solid fourth line center on some good teams. So those are like their bottom six doesn't have the like developmental upside that it has had the last couple of years. But at the same time, like their bottom sixes really haven't taken that huge step the last couple of years. So Buffalo kind of went out and they said, all right, well, we're gonna go with Jason Zucker, who's a sure thing. We're gonna go with Ryan McLeod, who's a sure thing. We're gonna go with Sam Lafferty, who's a sure thing, and even Abe Kubel, right? Like for the four guys they brought into this bottom six, they know what they're going to get from this season. And maybe that stability allows them to be more creative with everybody else. And I think that's got to be the hope for Buffalo, right? Is that now instead of having four lines of guys that you kind of need to let loose on, you can instead focus on just developing your young guys who you know already can play in the top six, right? And Peyton Krebs. But even then, I mean, Peyton Krebs is surrounded by five guys who are very consistent and solid, and you know what you're going to get from night in and night out. So even then, you can kind of give him more lenience to experiment and kind of develop in his own. So in that sense, the philosophy for this team actually shifted quite a bit this summer. Whereas comparatively, they really weren't going to get these sure things. They were just kind of plugging in their like superstar, like their highly skilled forwards into the bottom six and just kind of seeing who sank and who swam. This year, they've went out and they've really locked in guys who are like prototypical bottom six forwards. And that's kind of the difference in philosophy for Buffalo this summer. And I think that's actually going to be a benefit to them, even though on paper they might have gotten worse skill wise. I think that they went out and they acquired players who fit what they needed. And I'm actually excited to see that. And I think this team is going to be higher than 21 by the end of the year in offense, just because of the development of like all their young players and because they're going to get some consistency out of their bottom six. Moving on to the blue line, which I really like overall. I have them tied for 16th. So this is like your exact middle of the pack defense right now. The conversation has to start with Rasmus Dahlin. Um, there's still people out there who don't see Rasmus Dahlin as like a top 15 defenseman in the NHL. And that's crazy to me. This was a guy who was a Norris candidate um, like 2 years ago. He had a very strong season last year as well. This Norris candidate is, and like he was in the top five defenseman conversation. Um, it- he's extremely good. Like his possession ability and his play driving ability is among the best in the NHL. And he's definitely taken a step up defensively as well. And I think that's kind of helped round out his game a little bit. Whereas earlier in his career, he kind of had that negative aspect of his game where defensively he had some holes. He's become a lot better at suppressing chances. He's become a lot better at stopping break-ins. I'm intrigued to see what another full year of Rasmus Dahlin brings. Um, and I think this is again somebody who is a sleeper for the Norris again, and he needs to put up the points to get like the general audience vote. But at least from like a analytics perspective, I think he's gonna be somebody that you're gonna see a lot of the analytics community talking about as a dark horse Norris candidate by the end of the season, again. And it it really is like him finally becoming this defenseman that he was supposed to be when he got drafted, and that's what the last 2 years have been for him. And maybe it's because he plays in Buffalo and doesn't get a lot of like TV time that like the general audience doesn't understand how good he is. But I think this is kind of like a Miro Heiskanen situation where if like Buffalo makes the playoffs and wins a round, everybody's gonna be like, oh my God, Rasmus Dahlin has arrived. And it's like, well, actually, he was really good like 2 years ago. That seems to be kind of the vibe I get with Rasmus Dahlin is that a lot of the general audience doesn't respect how awesome he is as a defenseman because they see him play like twice a year and that's it. So hopefully Buffalo can get into the playoffs so Rasmus Dahlin can get his big showcase. Um, Owen Power is obviously the other big piece on this blue line, and another guy who has kind of come into his own over the last year and a bit. And he's somebody that I was low on in the draft at the time. Low on is in I think I had him like third. Um, but he's really proved me wrong in that, where he's shown a lot more dynamic game, a much more dynamic side of his game that I didn't see when he was in junior. And it's been very refreshing. I think it's given Buffalo really a top four that's become pretty solidified now. And I mean, they had Bowen Byram as well, who I think was just somebody who needed more spotlight. And I mean, as soon as he got to Buffalo, we saw Bowen Byram kind of go crazy. Um, and again, I think a full year of Bowen Byram in your top four, giving him that opportunity that he really couldn't get in Colorado because of how stacked their blue line was. It made sense to kind of give him a fresh start and somewhere new to play. So I like him as kind of the third guy on this blue line. Samuelson's interesting. I'm not Sabres fans, at least when they signed the deal, I don't know what the temperature is now. I guess I'm going to find out in the comments of this video. But when they signed the deal for Samuelson, everybody loved it. Um, I never was a Samuelson fan. I think his underlying numbers were extremely underwhelming, especially for the money they gave him. Um, his defensive ability, which is like the selling point for Samuelson, really wasn't anything like insanely special, especially for the length of contract and the money they gave him. And it didn't really project to be anything special. Um, we'll see. I mean, the jury's still out. He's still young, and we're still just like on the beginnings of that deal. But so there's still a chance that he could develop into that player. But as of now, like I don't see him being anything more than um turning into like a good like fourth defenseman on this team, which is fine because they already have three really solid defensemen ahead of him. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it was a bit of an overpayment. I've never been super high on him, but he did have a better year last year than he did the year before. So I'll give him credit for that. And at the bottom of this defensive group, you have Henry Jokiharju, who I feel has been playing in the NHL for a decade. Um, and Connor Clifton, who I like as a sixth option. I don't know why I think Henry Jokiharju has been around for so long, but it's just there's something about him that just screams this guy's played in the NHL since like 2008. Um, I don't know what it is. Um, maybe I'm the only one. Please, like, let me know if anybody else feels like this guy is not like this guy should be in his like late 30s by now. Maybe that's just me being an insane person. But anyway, I like the bottom. I like the bottom pair. It is a solid bottom pair for what it is. And again, I think there's upside in the top four, right? I think Samuelson could take another step. I expect Owen Power to take another step. I don't know if Rasmus Dahlin gets to like an A plus defenseman, but he might move up in the A category. And then Bowen Byram again with more exposure should naturally just move up to like a B just because he's going to be playing more. So again, defensively, like it's tied for 16th right now, but I think it's another group that could take a step up. And let me know if you've heard this story before with Buffalo, where the the potential on this team is extremely high. And I feel like we've been here before, and we've had this conversation every year for the last 2 years. Maybe this is the time we finally get to see it. Maybe. I don't know. Finally, defend in goal is again a unit that has the potential to be way better than what they are. They're tied for 23rd right now. This doesn't include. I know I've talked about this before, but the ranking does not include James Reimer because I wanted to avoid teams spamming like fifth fifth tier defensemen like Toronto did this summer where they signed like seven NHL defensemen. Um, and only six people are going to play. So there's another category that I just don't talk about in these videos because most of the time it's just filled with like AHLers, but I'll mention it here because James Reimer is also ranked as a C minus. Um, it's a different category that's just depth, and it's just everybody who's not in the main video. and their ranking still affects the team. So James Reimer's overall goes towards their depth ranking, which does have like a um it's like scaled down, so you don't get as many points for having a C minus goalie in your depth category as you would having him in your main two goalies, basically. So just you get points for having depth, but it doesn't affect the ranking as much as it would if he was in the main roster, if that makes sense. So it does still affect the ranking. He's just not on here. I love James Reimer. I think he's a really solid like backup for a team that has a true number one goalie. Um, I've plugged him everywhere. I love James Reimer. That's all I need to say about that. But these are the two goalies here who are going to be the bearer of the load here in Buffalo. And Uka looked really good last year. He had a really strong season. He's gotten better. Devin Levi, on the other hand, didn't. He had his very strong like coming out party as a rookie. And then last year he really regressed back to being the typical like young goalie who is very inconsistent, which I think it's expected by a lot of people who weren't Sabres fans who got super excited about Devin Levi, who I still really like, by the way. This isn't a knock on Devin Levi. Like he's one of my favorite young goalies in the NHL, but it's just like this is the process for young goalies is they're going to take time. It's going to take time for them to kind of figure it out and find true consistency. And they're going to have spurts where they have like a 15, 20 game run where they look like they're going to win the Vezina trophy. And then they'll fizzle out for a little bit. That's just how especially young goalies work. You kind of just got to give him time. The fact that Uka found a bunch of consistency last year too gives me a lot of hope that they can give Levi that time because he doesn't have to step in and become the starter right away, like a lot of people thought he was going to be. So I think overall, I mean, again, this is a unit that could take a big step this season, which I feel like has been the story of Buffalo this whole video has been the Buffalo Sabres might be really good this year, and that was the story of Buffalo last year. I had them making the playoffs. I had them finishing third in the Atlantic. I don't know if I'm gonna go out on a limb at the end of this because at the very end of this series, I'm gonna release like my full like actual standings predictions on my Instagram. Go follow my Instagram, NBA Hockey. It's linked in the description. I can put links in the description now. Um, so I don't know if I have Buffalo as a playoff team because I think the East is kind of, especially at this point, is very clustered. You'll see that I have a couple East teams coming up. Spoiler alert. But especially in the Atlantic, right? Like there's this big gap, and I think Montreal also kind of maybe not put themselves in this same group, but definitely elevated themselves with the acquisition of Patrick Laine. Like if they can get a healthy Kirby Dach, then like their top six is pretty good too. So it, Buffalo's kind of in that weird group, and one of these teams is going to need to get that next step from multiple players in order to make the push above like kind of the pack. I think Buffalo has the most potential to do that because they have the most amount of players who can take that next step, right? Like I don't think we talked about Detroit last time. I don't think there's like almost anybody on Detroit that has that super ability to like jump up like crazy this season. Montreal does, but I think Montreal's too far away to make that happen. And then Ottawa's kind of in that weird moment where like a lot of their team is already solidified, but they have a couple guys who could still step up. Like Buffalo definitely has the most growth potential of that kind of bottom half of the Atlantic, but it just needs to happen. Like we've had this conversation for 2 years now about the Buffalo Sabres, where it's like, oh, this team's gonna be really good this year. This is the breakout year for the Sabres. And the last year was the same thing. It was, oh, this is the breakout year for the Sabres. I mean, I bought into it. I had them third in the Atlantic. It's kind of at the point now where like I need to see it before I believe it now because it's just like I've been burnt on this team too many times. I remember years ago, this is probably good news for Buffalo fans, but I remember years ago, I predicted the Capitals to win the cup like 3 years in a row. And every year they lost in the second round. And I finally told myself, I'm like, I'm not picking Washington. I just can't do it out of principle because they've made me look like an idiot every time. And the first year I didn't pick them to win the Stanley Cup, they went and won the Stanley Cup. So maybe this is a good thing for Sabres fans if I don't have you in the playoffs. Use that as motivation and as like a good thing. I mean, ask Panthers fans what happened after I made the Florida Panthers are I'm low on the Florida Panthers post on Instagram a couple years ago because they just went on to win the President's Trophy and a Stanley Cup. So um, you go ask them; they will tell you what a low prediction by me means for your team. Um, in some cases. So yeah, I mean, like, there's a ton of potential here. It's a super exciting roster. I can't sit here and tell you that everybody's going to pop off and this team's going to make the playoffs because I've done that the last 2 years and it's burnt me. So we're not going to do that just yet. I'm not saying they're not making the playoffs either. I haven't decided yet. We'll find out at the end of the year, at the end of this series when I make my full predictions. But it's an exciting team. You, as a Sabres fan, you should be excited about Buffalo because you have all this potential, and maybe that makes it worse. Like, I don't know. Let me know if you're a Sabres fan. Let me know if it's worse to like believe that your team's finally gonna pop off and they don't, or if it's just better to be the like 2014 Sabres where you win 10 games and you're cheering when your team loses. Like, which one's better? I Let me know. Because I'm actually kind of genuinely curious. But yeah, I think there's a ton of potential in this team. I really like it. We'll see if it actually turns into something this year. I think it has potential too. I think they did the right things, but we'll see. Anyway, thank you for watching. This was episode 21. I'm hoping to get episode 20 out like tomorrow. That's the goal. Um, we'll see. I keep saying that in all these videos, but I actually like have things lined up so that I should be able to get it out tomorrow. And I'm hoping to get episode 19 out before I move. I move on September 1st, so you'll see a different situation here. I'm going back to school. So I'll be in my dorm after that. So, and then September is just going to be a crazy amount of videos because I'm going to have maybe 18 to make in 31 days. So, yeah, it's going to be kind of a wild September, but we'll pull through it. But thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed, leave a like. Let me know what you think of the Buffalo Sabres down below. And again, I think this team's got a ton of potential. I like them, but we need to see it happen. And yeah, make sure you follow the Instagram as well. Links in the description. And we'll see you in the next video.